Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Capital Ideas. My name is Nick Morgan. I'm the host of today's episode, co-host with Dara, and the founder of ICAN, the Investor Choice Advocates Network. And the purpose of this series is to focus on the wonderful ideas that make our lives better and the capital markets that make it happen. Dara?
Oh, thank you, Nick. And I'm Dara Albright. I'm the co-host of Capital Ideas and a proud board member of ICAN. And please join us today in welcoming Dar'shun Kendrick. Dar'shun is a securities attorney, business coach, investment advisor, and state representative in the Georgia House of Representatives, my home state. Dar'shun, it's an honor to have you on. And would like to start with the first question being, what would you say are some of the key challenges facing startup founders today?
Well, thank you for having me. This is a topic that I'm excited to always talk about because I not only represent small business owners and growing founders as an attorney, but I was raised by small business owners and I represent small business owners in the legislature. So this is a topic that always hits close to home. So a few things to answer your question about, some of the barriers to startups. One of them is always going to be access to capital. You ask any entrepreneur, even if they're not a startup, access to capital is always going to be number one on the radar. But as the generations get younger and younger that are starting up, I am hearing sort of a second barrier to startups, which is good mentorship. So sort of gone are the days where it's less relational and sort of do as I say. People are really looking for those people that have been there and done that to give them guidance, so they don't have to make the same mistakes, right? And that makes sense. If you can make the mistake and I can avoid it, I would much rather, you make the mistake and you tell me what to do so I don't make the same mistake. So mentorship is a big deal. I know, particularly here in Georgia, we have a certain number of Fortune 500 companies. And I don't want to say what the number is because I keep forgetting the number, but we have a large concentration of Fortune 500 companies. And a lot of those Fortune 500 companies offer that type of mentorship that I'm talking about, where they have special programs where they will bring on suppliers in order to show them this is how you get put into the supply chain. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. And I think that is so valuable, particularly here in Georgia, for making sure that we have a robust startup ecosystem, which we do. We're still not on the top list of all these lists I've been seeing, but I'm working on that. So that's probably the second thing. And maybe the third thing that probably has cropped up since the pandemic really is on getting a great workforce, right? Particular workforce that is easy to retool and train. I do a lot of work around making sure that people are ready for artificial intelligence and just the jobs of the future in general, because once you've been doing a job for some while, there's always that resistance to sort of step into the future. And I think for startups, getting people who are willing to take on that learning curve, because it is a learning curve, sometimes can be a bit of a barrier. Or you'll have on the other end of the spectrum people who think they know it all, right, and are very technical and don't understand how to translate those technical skills into part of a growing team that can create a culture that is focused on a vision and not just the technical aspect of it, but understand that the business has to grow, not just the product or service.
Right.
I love it. And I love the fact that Georgia is doing so much in the mentoring space. I mean, I know that we've been on the forefront in the fintech world and becoming one of the leading fintech hubs in the United States. So it's really great. And thanks for all the great work that you're doing in making all of that possible. My second question is, what can founders do, though, to better position themselves for attracting capital?
Well, in my experience, and I've been practicing law for 17 years, I cannot believe it. I used to be young, believe it or not. And And so I've been practicing securities law specifically for the last 14 to 15 years. And will tell you the number one way to attract investors is always going to be revenue, like a proven concept, right? Because it shows that it's proven in the market. And I always tell founders, nobody's going to pay for a mousetrap if there are no mice, right? You got to have a market for what it is that you're selling, right? And one of the ways you prove that is revenue. Right? That's the best indicator that somebody wants your product, is somebody willing to pay for your product or service. And the second way for startups to get capital, and sometimes I use these interchangeably because depending on who I'm speaking with, it changes. But the second way is to assemble a great team of people. Because no matter how great your idea is, if there is not people to execute it, it's just a hallucination, right? Because we can dream all day, but if there's nobody to implement it, it's useless. And so making sure that you have a great team that understands the vision, the culture, what you're trying to do, that communicates, believes in the vision like you do, is one of, if not close to, producing actual revenue, that I say that startups can really improve their chances of getting to a yes, which is one of the things we do at my law firm. Is we coach our clients on getting to a yes, getting closer to a yes. You're going to hear no a lot. We can't guarantee a yes, but we can prepare you to get closer to that yes.
Well, it sounds like there are lots of positive things people can do if they're trying to think about accessing the capital markets, a lot of different barriers. At ICAN, one of the types of barriers we focus on is regulatory barriers. And so you're uniquely, I think, positioned to talk about some of the regulatory barriers that you've seen as a securities attorney and as an advisor to new companies. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges on the regulatory front that might need some reform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and this is, I'm actually planning an event in March in North Georgia. So you should come, Dara, where I'm moderating a 2-day panel for the SEC. So I do a lot of joint events and things with them, particularly in the capital formation space. So we're having a 2-day conference in March, at the end of March, that I'm moderating. But one of the things that I always tell the Securities and Exchange Commission Capital Formation Committee, and I attend, their events and I listen to their proposals, is I understand that the reason that the SEC was put in place by the 1934 Act was in response to the Great Depression, right? So I know that they have a job of protecting investors, but sometimes we hold on so tightly, right, that we're stopping the actual, free markets and empowering people to their own self-destination. We're overprotective. And so I think that balance is one of the things that the SEC has to deal with, and particularly in the space of who gets access to private markets, because that's what we're talking about. And the biggest barriers to access to private market, in my opinion, is 2 things. One, the definition of accredited investor, because if you're an accredited investor under Rule 501 of the Securities and Exchange Commission rule, you have so many more opportunities to access the capital markets. There's not the same restraints on you, the same paperwork required to disclose on you if you're an accredited investor. And I understand the reason for having that accredited investor definition, but the problem with the definition as it stands right now is I think it assumes that if you're wealthy, then you're knowledgeable, and that is not necessarily true. And so they made changes like in 2020 where I got actually placed as an accredited investor because I have a Series 65 license. But I have been practicing securities law for the last 10 years. And even I didn't qualify as an accredited investor outside of the financial threshold. And I said, that that doesn't make sense. Like, I study securities law, and I do it every day. And so I think that there is a push. There was a new report that came out from the Small Business Capital Formation that they published on the website, and that was one of the recommendations. It's a recommendation every year, just so we're clear. It's a recommendation every year to update the accredited investor rules. So this is not like nothing new. So I don't know if the SEC is going to take that up, because they're dealing with crypto and ESG regulation and sort of these other things that I think the commissioners might be focusing on. But that's one of the barriers. Who gets access to capital markets the most? It's accredited investors that is not directly linked to sophistication or the protection I think the SEC is trying to get at, and that's the balance that they've been dealing with. The second thing that is really a barrier, I believe, is taxes. I believe personally that taxes is the biggest driver of generational wealth gap that the United States can ever do. Is the tax code. Who knows the tax code? Who doesn't know the tax code? Who can get the advantage of tax planning? Who cannot? And also, who can get tax credits and things, and who cannot? For example, in the state of Georgia, we had an angel investor tax credit. We had it for 4 or 5 years. The problem with the angel investor tax credit, it was a dollar for dollar tax credit, is that the only people who could use the tax credit were accredited investors. Which makes no sense.
No.
Because the people that need the tax credit probably are not wealthy people.
Right.
And so that tax credit has since expired. But one of the things that I have always advocated for, even in discussions to bring it back up, is we don't need to put it only for people who otherwise don't even need the tax credit. If we're going to open up tax credits, open it up for everyone. It doesn't have anything to do with their level of sophistication, because it's just a state tax credit. Give it to everyone, not 2% of Georgia, which is around the number of accredited investors we have here in Georgia. Open it up for everyone. So to me, those are the two biggest barriers.
It's so interesting that you say that, because on the tax credit, first of all, we have the Invest Georgia exemption here, which was the second state in the union to actually have an interstate crowdfunding legislation on the books. So, I mean, they should have incorporated the tax credit with the IGE. I mean, maybe that's something, to contemplate. And, you had mentioned the accredited investor rule, which is something Nick and I are really passionate about. I know he's going to have some comments on this too. But one of the things, I noticed the SEC came out with a new report, deciding what they're going to do to adjust the accredited investor definition based on inflation. And what I find so ridiculous, here the government is coming out and saying inflation is at bay, inflation is fine, where we're even thinking about lowering interest rates, yet inflation is probably so problematic that the SEC needs to raise the accredited investor rule to prevent even more people from participating.
Yeah, and it shows the exact flaw in the original definition when it first came out, which is you're equating a number to sophistication or experience in the market. So my point is if you want to do that, if you want to index the financial portion of an accredited investor, you have to look at the other definitions to open it up so that more people are able to participate in it. You can't have it both ways, where you're limiting the other and keep raising the main financial part of it. So I'm definitely with you on that one.
Well, we hear, that is a common criticism of the accredited investor rule, the tying of the financial metrics to the sophistication. It just doesn't seem logical. But I hadn't heard what you're pointing out about the overlay of the tax issue. That's very interesting. I want to look more into that, because you're exactly right, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could probably go on all day. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts, and maybe we could do another session sometime. But for now, maybe we'll leave it there. And really, thank you for coming on. Thank you, Dara, and for everybody else. We'll see you on the next episode of Capital Ideas, and check us out at icanlaw.org for more information. Thanks very much.